Today we're going to talk about the TCNA Handbook, which truly is not a standard per se, but it certainly is a critical handbook we use in making recommendations, methods that are adopted by industry as best practices. We're going to review the TCNA Handbook and industry standards and other resources briefly. Understand the coordination between those documents. Understand tile setting materials and application methods and how they're in the handbook. Learn the TCNA Handbook of ceramic, glass, and stone tile installation and how it was changed in 2019, how frequently those changes go through, and why these changes can benefit your project. And how to use the TCNA Handbook to improve the quality of your project specifications and your project in general. Just some brief explanations to kind of get things explained and maybe get us on a good start. First, we're going to talk about thin bed or thin set type applications. By far the most popular type of application today. It's used when tiles were typically smaller in format, 12 by 12, 8 by 8, et cetera, et cetera. The thickness is fairly uniform. The substrate should be flat and already prepped. It can be used from 3/32 in thickness, the minimum thickness, to as thick as 1/4 of an inch after beat in. So these would be your basic thin sets like Ultraflex 1, Ultraflex 2, etc. It's a new term in the industry called large and heavy tile mortar. It is now recognized by ANSI. So what used to be called a medium bed is now called large and heavy tile mortar. The LHT mortars can be troweled thicker than traditional thin set mortars, even though it's still considered a thin bed. This allows for thick set attributes when used in a thin set application. Great example would be with an ungauged slate. You can use this thicker material or thicker bedding of adhesive to kind of take care of some of the irregularities in those. It can be applied again. It's 3/32 minimum thickness to as thick as a 1/2 inch after the tile has been beat in. It's typically used for large format tiles, tiles with one edge greater than 15 inches. When a tile or stone is inconsistent in thickness and you're trying to even that out, maybe a small slight substrate irregularity or a very heavy tile. LHT was designated with an H when it's used with ANSI 118.1, 118.4, and 118.15 mortars. So you would see it read something like ANSI 118.4H at the end of it. That means it has large and heavy tile characteristics. Thin bed as opposed to this thick bed. We're taking sand and cement, creating a mortar bed, or what's called thick set, a thick bed, or mud bed. Generally a nominal 1.25 inches thick. Sand and cement, mixture anywhere from 5:1 to 4:1 to 6:1, depending on the thicknesses and what the tile contractor is really looking to do with it. All right, let's talk a little bit about TCNA and ANSI. I'm not going to get much into ANSI, but I think it's important that we talked about them together. So in the TCNA Handbook, it references ANSI quite substantially. The American National Standards Institute, or the specifications and standards describing the quality of the tile setting materials and methods, and tile for that matter, even the quality of the tile. So I like to think of the TCNA as kind of the pretty drawings, the plans, if you might, on your construction project. ANSI is the specifications. No pretty pictures, just all the environmental requirements, all the requirements for use of the product, you know, your part 1, part 2, etc. of a standard specification. So they work together. Neither one of them should be used really independently. TCNA references within methods, ANSI, and ANSI does not reference TCNA because there's no really real reason to go back to the handbook, but there is some repetitive information in both. TCNA and ANSI. One, they are voluntary standards, and this would be true of ISO as well. It's not like the building code. The building code's actually a legal document if the state adopts it or the local authority adopts it. Really you have to build to that code by law. Here, ANSI and TCNA are not considered legal documents per se. They're not a requirement. They're voluntary standard. So there's no compliance, but they are considered our industry's best practices. And unfortunately, if something is to go bad and you end up having to go to court, the odds are extremely high these documents are going to follow you into it because they're considered our industry standards. It's what a judge is going to say, you're not doing it for the industry. One thing to kind of understand is that TCNA Handbook, ANSI, and the ISO standards are all developed through industry consensus or open committees. So to try and get a new standard put through, for instance, we just recently got gauge porcelain tile installation, gauge porcelain tile standards passed. That's presented in a room of 65 people, and we all have to agree on virtually everything. If there's negatives, it goes generally back to the committee to try and solve those negative comments or negatives in the vote, and then we re-vote it on. So we don't have to have 100% compliance, but we certainly are shooting for that every time we try to put a document out. That means that when we put a document out, we try to get everybody involved. We try to get labor involved. We try to get manufacturers of setting material involved, manufacturers of tile, consultants. In some of these committees, CSI and the AIA are involved, and they have representation. American Wood Council, a lot of different organizations in order to come out with the fairest standards that we can or the best for our industry. All right, so the TCNA Handbook used to be renewed or redone about every 2 years. And now it's a little bit different. Because of the way it is electronically today, we can actually make changes on the fly. If we feel like, it would certainly meet yearly, but if there's something that's substantially wrong, we could really put it to a vote and get it changed right away. Of course, it's a publication, so it takes a while for that to get out into the public, but this is really true of ANSI. We could pass a standard just out of the blue, and that used to be done about every 5 years. So really have changed this quite a bit with the electronic era today. It's published annually and has for about 50 years. In 2011, major renovations were made to the handbook to combine tile, glass tile, as well as stone into one resource. As I said, minor changes can occur year to year. The most highly anticipated change coming up that I get asked about a lot is methods for gauge porcelain tile and gauge porcelain tile panels / slabs. I'm actually involved in a small committee that put together 16 different methods that we proposed. And recently at a handbook meeting in Nashville, I believe, at TSP, we came to an agreement that basically getting 2 of those methods through, this is kind of the format of it, if you might. And so now TCNA, it's in their hands, and their staff are trying to put together another 16, 20 methods to propose to the handbook committee. And once we get that going, we eventually have methods within a TCNA handbook. Right now, the thinking is that since we published a document for just the ANSI standards for gauge porcelain tile for interior installation and the product itself, the material, the gauge porcelain tile, that we might put those methods into a handbook similar to that and have one handbook all for gauge porcelain tile. That being said, I'll also mention that committee recently sent to ANSI a recommendation for exterior ANSI recommendations for exterior installation of gauge porcelain tile. So the first one that passed was interior. The one that is proposed right now to ANSI, not up for a vote yet, but hopefully sometime in our near future, is for exterior installation as well. So some important changes in 2019. You might even ask me why 2019? Well, I know it's 2020, but that 2020 handbook is not out yet. Generally it comes out coverings, which is this week. So hopefully we'll hear something in the very near future about the 2020 out, but at this point I do not have one, and so I couldn't reference it. Some of the revisions were to breaking strength, bond strength, crazing, and thermal shock sections within the ceramic tile selection guide up in the front end of the book. Also revised was where glass tile was added to the CAD details because the method showed ceramic as well as glass tile. So they added that to it. More of an editorial change. I know the TCNA handbook can be intimidating. It's 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 thick, but it really does contain a lot of important critical information. Important that you should be able to reference to specifiers, bidders, and or tile contractors. The most directly applicable portions of the handbook are the methods themselves. The methods are numbered, so the proper reference can be included in the specification. So they might say, I want crack isolation like F125, and call that out in a specification. As a contractor, you know what to bid. The numbers start with initials. F for floor, as you see the method in the CAD detail on the right. W for walls. B or SR for bathtubs, showers, and or steam rooms. SR being steam rooms, of course. C means ceilings or countertops. And P is pools or water features, wet installations. After that, generally comes a number and a date. So right now, again, working in 2019, you see a method on the right, B421C 19. Some methods may look redundant because they repeat. There's an F11319, thin bed over concrete. There's also an F113A 19 to differentiate it because it's above ground. The reason why that's a little bit different because above ground requires different movement joint requirements. So the method didn't make sense to just include it all in one. F116E 19 is for on ground or above ground installed with epoxy adhesive. Or F116O 19 on ground, above ground installed with organic adhesives. So that's where these little numbers at the end come in and why it might look like you got the same method with different numbers. B421 is just a shower method, showing the shower pan and so on. But F421C is a curbless shower, a zero entry shower over solid backing with a bonded waterproof membrane. In the front of the handbook, there's a resource guide, very, very helpful. Some of the best information that you'll find on the industry is in the product selection guides. In the product selection guides, there's ones for ceramic, there's ones for how to select glass tile, there are ones for stone, there are ones for mortars, backer boards, grouts, membranes, etc. So again, very, very important information. The field and installation requirements, these are where some of the requirements come in for lippage and grout joint size and running bond, etc. The floor tiling installation guide, and that is kind of based on Robinson, and I'll show you that in a minute. Environmental exposure classifications, glass and tile installation methods. These are the actual installation methods themselves, and stone tile installation methods. There's a TCNA tile initiative, and there's some good information there about why tile is green, the why tile program, some of the trainings going on through CTEF and the ACT program. So very, very good information there. And of course, the EJ 171 movement joint guidelines for ceramic tile, glass, and stone. So one of the biggest tricks, if you ask me, or important parts of the book are hidden in the back. I like to call these the table of contents, and they're set up a few different ways. So if you are bidding a document, you've got a set of specifications in front of you, and it says you're looking for B421. If you go to the method locator by method number in the back, it'll tell you exactly what page that's on, rather than trying to go through page by page and try and find out where that might be. It also lists the ISO standards. There's another section for how they came up with estimated weights for floor installations. The test methods that are referenced explains those in more detail. And like I said, the method locator by method number, to me, critical document. and it's hidden in the back. The resource guide in the back also includes appendices, method locator by tile application. So for instance, you're looking for, in this case, floors interior over plywood and with 16 inches on center. You can look in the very back and it'll actually tell you the method number and page. And it's got multiple pages because there are quite a few applications. Really a helpful tool to know about. You're looking for a curbless shower or curbless shower pan by going to the first page of the method locator by application for tile. You'll see it right away and be able to look up that method number and the exact page. There's also one for stone, very similar to the tile one, set up by application, page number, and just specific to stone. So there's some installation guides, methods really by type. So we got ceramic, porcelain, and glass tiles, and then we also have stone or dimensional stone tiles in the back. Again, methods by application area, floors, interior and exterior. Example is floors F113. Or walls, interior, exterior, W211. Just an example, that's all these are. Ceilings and soffits, C315. Bathtubs, showers, and receptors, B421. Countertops, C512. Swimming pools, P601. Radiant heat floors, they're a little bit different. RH 116. Renovations, tile renovations is what TR means. Tile renovations, 712. That talks about tile over tile, tile over other substrates. Steam rooms, refrigerator rooms, fountains, SR 614. And of course, movement joints, EJ 171. Expansion joint 171. Let's look a little bit at typical method. So the typical method, you're going to have the standard at top, CAD detail, any important notes, recommended uses, where this installation should go, on grade, above grade, etc. Service rating, we'll get into that in a second. Environmental exposure classifications, again, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. The weight of this type of installation, that's always helpful. Someone's always asking about what's this going to add to my structure, especially design professionals. So this gives you some pretty good details on that. Limitations, membrane options. Again, this is also referencing some of the other standards or methods, Requirements of this method. Materials, this is where they'll reference ANSI standards and ISO. Preparation by other trades. So generally you're walking on a project and you're not building the house, you're not pouring the concrete slab. What are we expecting from somebody doing that for us? What are the expectations? Movement joints, required. But important note here, contractor friendly. Architects must specify the type of joint and show location and details on the drawing. We'll come back to that in a little bit more detail too when we talk about movement joints. Installation specifications relevant to this method. And important notes. These are always pretty important to read through too, I'll say that. And materials and sustainable design. A lot of us get asked about green building today quite frequently, and there's always a typical comment in every single method regarding that as well. So that's what a typical method looks like. Now let's talk a little bit about service levels or installation guide. So methods are based on, this is based on the ASTM test method C627, which is a standard for evaluating ceramic tile floor tile in an installation using the Robinson flooring test. So what this really means is a gentleman by the name of Robinson at Clemson University many years ago came up with a test method or test testing machine that really kind of tests out ceramic tile floors, and we'll show you this in a little bit more detail. In the handbook, it tells you if you were to use this, if it passed residential, light, moderate, heavy, or extra heavy, and what that type of service area might be. Let's get into this a little bit more detail. So on the left picture, you kind of see the original ASTM C627 test, the Robinson test. And it's a yoke that comes up from the center that rotates around in a circle, and they put weights on it and basically start to try to wear or beat up really a floor. We just recently made some changes to it 2 years ago, I'd say, off the top of my head, but it's a very common, what we call measuring stick for tile performance and system performance too. So let me give you an example. In the bottom right, you see our actual Robinson without its protective guard on there, just for picture purposes. But in this case, we were testing joists, 20-foot span with gauge porcelain tile on it. So the machine you see there is what's called a universal machine. So all the weights in the center, and it puts them down by pins. And so you kind of get to switch through weights as well here. So what really happens here is, the easiest way to explain it is, if I took a concrete slab, which is what typically is the Robinson substrate, and I put quarry tile with a latex modified mortar in it, and got it installed correctly, fairly level, no lippage, grouted it, 1/4-inch joints, so on, I could pretty much expect that to go to a heavy, extra heavy rating system. That means that it's rotated through 14 cycles. Now, give you a little bit of an idea, through residential and light, we're using soft rubber wheels. It goes through 900 rotations in each of those. The weights go from 100 to 200 to 300 per wheel. And that rotates, as I said, 900 times. And then go to the next level, 4 through 6, and again for light. Then we put on hard rubber wheels and go through 10. If it passes 10 cycles with the hard rubber wheel as well, then it gets a moderate rating. If it goes further and we put on, again, hard rubber wheel, same type of rotation, 900 rotation, 900 cycles, and gets through 12 different cycles of that, it's considered heavy. If we put on steel wheels and it goes through, really at this point, it's 14,000 rotations or something like that. It's amazing when you really add them all up. It's considered extra heavy. So this can really beat up a floor system. If I put a 10 millimeter or 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch recycled rubber sound membrane in that same system with the quarry tile, thin set, and so on, you wouldn't expect it to go extra heavy. I would expect it to go moderate at best. So that's how we rate how these different components come into a flooring system and how it affects the performance or wear on that system. Hope that makes some sense. All right, environmental exposure classifications. As I said, it's in every single method. And the reason for that is because tile is commonly used where things are wet. This originally came out as an environmental classification for the cement board manufacturers or board manufacturers. But finding the benefit of being able to rate things in a wet area, it kind of got taken away from board people, if you might, and became part of an everyday method. And some methods were added, like submerged. They didn't submerge, typically board. You can see you got light residential, number 1, that's a dry environment, or residential 2, limited water exposure, could be a bath floor. Residential wet would be R3, so a bathtub or shower. High humidity, heavy moisture exposure, you're talking about a steam room, RES4. Res 5 includes high temperature as well. Res 6, exterior, and Res 7, submerged like a pool or wet water feature. And the same thing true of commercial. Now movement joints. We've got, years ago we had the recommendation to have a soft joint every 24 to 36 feet interior. That recommendation changed in 2011 to include 20 to 25 feet interior. It changed in 2017 to include maximum every 25 feet. So they kind of took away the range, just assuming that you know you could do less than, but you at least have to put movement joints or soft joints at the perimeter, around any protrusions, and every 25 feet each direction. 2019, again, cleaned it up a little bit more, maximum 25 feet each direction. Also, the exterior recommendations, you can see, made some changes in 2011, tightened it up a little bit. What also changed is areas that are indoor exposed to direct sunlight or moisture, because that causes a lot of thermal expansion contraction. It changed from 12 to 16 feet to 8 to 12 feet. The idea of being able to try to get it in alignment with the concrete industry and where they cut their control joints generally. And of course, then maximum 12 feet each direction, and above grade concrete slabs, a little bit tighter than typical interior recommendations. Contractor friendly language again. One thing that's in the EJ 171 movement joint method, it says clearly, please, because of limitless conditions and structural systems on which tiles can be installed, the architect or designer shall show specific locations and details of movement joints on project drawings. This is important. I mean, installer knows that they have to be installed, but they don't have to pick out where they're going to be located. Some of that is done by the building itself, how much movement or is anticipated in one area versus another. Also by design. In other words, I might want to create a straight line if there's an L shape directly across the longest part. That's up to the design professional to lay that out and kind of point out where they would like to see that. Excuse me. Some contractor-friendly language in the front of the book in the glass tile selection installation guide really talks about some of the really important information you should know when you're installing glass. It's very different, obviously, than ceramic tile. One, it's vulnerable to cracking. Some manufacturers recommend that you have a crack isolation membrane. Movement joints, because in the movement joint section, EJ 171 that we were just in, it also mentions that glass tile expands more than ceramic tile. It's far more expansive than ceramic tile. So if you're in a range of movement joints, for instance, let's just go to exteriors, because again, it's a wet area, of 8 to 12, we would recommend that glass have a movement joint every 8 feet, the low end of the range, instead of 12 foot, which is the high end of the range, because it has more potential to crack, really. So we want to make sure that it allows for as much movement due to all the moisture as possible. This is one installation in a pool that I went and visited in Colorado, and you can just see it's cracking all throughout it. It's unfortunate, very, very unfortunate. The whole pool looked like this. Sad. It was indoors, by the way. All right, large and heavy tile mortars. Like I said, this is something that we really made a big change in finally getting that into the ANSI standards this year. I think it's a very, very valuable change, very important move. And the way it reads in the TCNA Handbook, still 2019, is it is intended to be used in a bond code from, as I said earlier in the beginning, 1/32 to 1/2 inch in thickness after the tile's been embedded. LHT, or what's formerly known as medium bed mortars, is declared as such by the manufacturer based on its characteristics. There are no ANSI or ISO standards. Wait a minute. I just said there was, and there is. So at the time this was written, the ANSI designation for large and heavy tile, or what was formerly known as medium bed, passed in 2019. So now if it has an H at the end of the designation, so 118.4H as an example, or 118.15H, it is a large and heavy tile mortar. So the 2020 handbook will read much different than what it did in 2019. The test methods for large and heavy tile mortar, as an example, because we're building it up thicker, it tests for shrinkage, it tests for lippage, and heavy tile. So it'll be in the ANSI handbook come out, the next one that comes out, and again, it is recognized by having a H designation at the end of the typical ANSI number. The characteristics for LHT, or where this product is very useful, is with heavyweight tiles, ones that are heavier than traditional 3/8. Tiles that are ungauged in thickness. Like I said, I know when I was installing, we used to commonly get 18 by 18 inch ungauged slate. One end of the gauge slate could be 3/8 of an inch and the other end 3/4 of an inch. We would screed that off so that all of it was 3/4 of an inch and set that into a mortar bed so that we had good coverage of that tile and setting material on the back of it. Where large tiles are used, because where this comes in handy is when you've got warpage in tile. The larger the tile, in the case of plank as an example, almost all of that's always in the middle, in the center of the tile, and can be quite a bit off the ground, off the floor for that matter. And without having good bedding of material, it's going to sound hollow, you have potential for breaking and so on. So where we really want to have a good bedding of material to make sure that we get good coverage, these large and heavy tile mortars are excellent. A little bit more on that, to expand on that a little bit more. This is really a note to the specifier that's in the TCNA handbook regarding large and heavy tile mortar. For years, people were saying, instead of doing surface prep, just put a little bit more thin set underneath it. Or go out there and prepare that floor with the medium bed method. And there is no such thing as a medium bed method. There's a thin bed and there's a thick bed. So this is part of the reason why the name was changed to LHT, to kind of get away from that traditional recommendation. We saw it showing up in specifications quite frequently. So this is a note to the specifier calling out for the mortars that LHT is not to be used to correct the substrate. In other words, it's not intended to be used for truing or leveling of the substrate or the work of others. To me, I think this is extremely important. Because when you do that, quite frequently you could exceed the thickness, the recommended thickness of the LHT. Or for that matter, probably more important, tile's the only flooring industry that really doesn't get recognized for its surface prep. And today, because of large format and gauge porcelain tile and so on, I think that's changing quite a bit. But if the floor needs to be straighten it out with surface prep materials, which is what it's intended for, not with a mortar and building it up too thick. That can create shrinkage issues and other problems. So that's what this note is really about. It also states at the end of it, which I think is really important, that project plans and specifications that call for or refer to setting tile by a medium bed method or large and heavy tile method, or call for the bonding mortar to level, flatten, or fill the substrates or create slopes or transitions between finished floor heights, do not conform to the industry standards. Again, if surface prep needs to be done, it needs to be done correct to slope. Surface prep should be done, create your slope, and then come back and thin set to it, whether it's with an LHT or regular thin set mortar. It must be done previous to the installation of the tile. It's important. In the membrane guide, there's some other good helpful information. They talk about membranes when installed correct. When they're done perfectly, they can still produce hollow sounds. We have one membrane that's a sound membrane, a fairly thick one, and the fleece on the top of the membrane is intended to kind of separate from the floor and the membrane below it. In other words, it kind of creates almost a dead air space so that sound that's created in the tile isn't transferred down through the floor. It's very common. Most sound reduction membranes, most peel and stick type membranes, even uncoupling, those are going to sound hollow compared to one that's bonded directly to the tile, to the substrate. That does not mean it's an installation problem. This is important. I know many installers that have had to tear out tile after tile after tile in different areas of a project because it sounds hollow, only to find it's extremely well bedded, extremely well bonded, and all they're doing is tearing up the membrane. Refer to this section if this comes up in your project. Also, when membranes are used, mortar times can take a little bit longer to cure, especially in cold weather, of course. But because you're working on a waterproof membrane, or could be, again, recycled rubber or a bitumen membrane like pictured, it's not the same absorption as what it is to a concrete slab. So, of course, it's going to take longer for that mortar to start to set. One other note is that some of these membranes are sensitive to moisture. So, for instance, this one, the bitumen one that's in the picture, is put down with a primer, and that primer could be sensitive to moisture. In a calcium chloride test, we have 3 different levels of primers for that type of membrane, anywhere from 5 pounds per thousand to 5 pounds per 24 hours to 8 pounds to 15 pounds. So we put that all on our documents. It's clear on our membrane information, so look it up. But some other people may not have it. You might have to request it if needed. This is actually one of my favorite parts added to the handbook, and that says basically in ANSI, it states in 108.2, section 4.3, that tile layout should be centered and balanced. In other words, any area you walk into needs to be centered, and all the cuts on the outside. That makes complete sense. But it's not always practical. There's 4 bullets here that I think are very important. The size and configuration of the room and the size of the tile make it impossible to center the layout in all aspects and avoid cut tiles less than half a tile. It's a fact. It's absolutely impossible. The tile layout is continuous, flowing in multiple different rooms or multiple spaces, making it impossible to center the layout in all areas. I did a large office that we had years ago in Colorado, and 4,000 feet of just the office, and I had a large showroom, I had 2 bathrooms, I had a hallway, actually 3 hallways because they connected, so, and a desk area within that. There's no way I could center all that. It's absolutely impossible if it's going to be a continuous pattern. The overall layout and aesthetics are improved by laying out tiles such that the layout is not centered in all aspects. For example, full tile or cut tile in a highly visible location. If I walk into a bathroom as a tile setter and the tub is directly in front of the door, in other words, at the other end of the room, I generally am going to work full tile off of that, because that's in my opinion, the visual area. This is the area where your eyes are going to focus the most. I don't generally cut around a tub, or shower. That's kind of my starting point, just as an example. And also tile waste can be reduced quite substantially depending on the layout, if that layout is not centered. And so in the case of today with gauge porcelain tile, there is no way you're going to center all that. That makes no sense. If I've got a large doorway, I've got to create an L shape. I need the largest piece of tile around that L shape just for strength. So layout preferences of the design professional should be well defined ahead of time, prior to bidding. If the design professional and the tile contractor, they can work it out, but just out of necessity, they might have to change the pattern and what the architect had in mind, unless they're very, very specific and call that out very clearly. So many years ago, when it was all 4x4 wall tile and 8x8 was a large format for floor tile, centering and cutting around the outside edge for the most part made sense. Again, I would never do it in front of a tub, but that's just me. Today, I'm not sure it makes sense. Now with tiles that on the average are 12x24 or 18x36, it's very difficult to try and lay all that out and center the whole room. And tiles really aren't square anymore. Now they're more rectangular for the most part. So this language in ANSI needs to be changed, but in the meantime, at least we were able to make some changes in TCNA to highlight these changes. So be aware of them. If you start getting questioned about centering and things like that, use this document to your advantage. It's in the tile layout considerations in the front part of the TCNA handbook. Also, joint size, layouts, and patterns. Very, very important part of the front part of that handbook as well. This states when a design professional creates a modular pattern using tiles that are not specifically manufactured to be in a pattern. And I'll also say I've been on many projects where they buy or want tiles used from different manufacturers. And they expect them all to fit together because by theory, an 8x8 and a 16x16 should line up grout joint size if I put two 8x8s next to the 16x16. But if they're not manufactured to be, number one, calibrated and more precise, the odds are very slim that those grout joints are going to be consistent. And that's really what this is talking about. If you buy a Versailles pattern or a herringbone pattern, you know, those types of things that are intended for that purpose, that's one thing. But if you're going to buy different tiles of all things by different manufacturers and expect them to fit together in a nice pattern, the odds are very slim that those grout joints are going to be the same size. If the grout joint from the floor to the wall is expected to line up, that's important because this comes up quite frequently. For example, they don't want us to be really breaking at the wall. They want the joint to be continuous right up the wall. The design professional needs to confirm that these tiles are suitable to be able to do that. And I'll say the odds are slim that's going to happen. Even quarry tile to quarry tile base, generally base is larger, and there's a reason for that. So we aren't asked to try and line it up. We really have to sometimes try to move things around and open up a joint, if you might, to make it look still consistent. Last thing in the world we should be doing is cutting tiles to accommodate some pattern. That creates sharp edges and dangerous situations for sure. So modular pattern should be bought as a modular pattern. And again, if you're being asked to use tiles from different manufacturers and create a pattern, I would strongly recommend you do a mock-up and confirm that they're okay with the fact that these grout joints are going to be that inconsistent, because they will be. Absolutely will be. There's no way to avoid it. Again, I think a little bit more TCNA handbook tile-friendly language, tile contractor language, protecting new tile work. It's stated in the handbook that to avoid damage to tile work, the floor should be protected, right? I mean, of all things, we want to make sure that the finished floor doesn't have construction materials going over it and so on. That when they're painting the ceilings or walls, that they're not putting overspray on top of your brand new installation. But to keep all traffic off the finished floors until they have fully cured, the builder shall provide 3/4 inch thick plywood or OSB over non-staining craft paper. The reason for craft paper is because it breathes still. So if we had wet grout joints underneath there, for instance, cement grout joints, the moisture could still get out. To protect the floors after the installation, after the materials have cured. So that's important. It also goes on to say you shouldn't put polyethylene or visqueen, if you might, over a tile floor and then put plywood on it, because in the case of cement grout, that moisture is going to leave. It's going to trap underneath the visqueen and continue to drop on the joint till you have one very effloresced floor. So I know the contractors out there are saying, man, I wish this was really true in real life. I wish the builder would take care of it for me. Obviously, you've got to come to an understanding before the job starts, but it is important to know that this is in our standard and that they should be conforming to this. And if not, you just have to come to an agreement, whatever that might be. Also, when visually inspecting a finished tile, stone, or glass tile installation, it's not to be done under magnification, not underneath lights that are being walked around the project and saying when the sunlight comes in here at 3:45 in the afternoon and all the curtains are open, it looks wavy. not without additional lighting such as flashlights, spotlights, etc. It should be viewed from 36 inches from wall and 60 inches normal standing height from floors. Also should be recognized that tile is hand-built installation. It really is. You know, these things are not perfectly square. That's just the manufacturing process. So they're going to vary a little bit corner to corner. There are allowances for that. You know, if you're not buying rectified, machine cut edges and tight tolerances, the odds are very slim you're going to be able to put in that 1/8 of an inch joint they want, or for that matter, foolishly 1/16 of an inch joint. So, you know, be aware of this stuff. This stuff is in your handbook. Use it to your advantage. If somebody's down there with a spotlight, or for, like I said, they're standing in front of their front window and say they want you to meet there at 2:45, because between 2:45 and 3:30, it looks bad. The rest of the time, it's fine. That's not the way this is intended to be. All right, so in summary, I honestly believe the TCNA Handbook can be your friend. It can really assist you in bidding and in walking a project and trying to come to an agreement with the GC or superintendent for that matter. I know it's large. I know it's got a lot of information in it, but take time to go through it and understand the different parts of it so you can go through it a little bit easier when you need to. You know, use the method by application pages. That's one very, very helpful tool. Or for that matter, like I said, if you're bidding and all you have is method numbers, then look it up by the method number and they'll tell you the page number right next to it. Those are in the back of the book. While the TCNA Handbook's a voluntary guide, it is considered the industry's best practices. I can assure you, after being on this committee for 20 plus years, we aren't putting installations in there that are difficult. We're putting in really the minimum standards. In other words, we believe that if it's not done per the TCNA Handbook, the odds of it failing are fairly good. So these are minimum standards, not the best. The TCNA Handbook is an essential tool for design professionals, bidders, and tile contractors. And just to at least be on the same page so that everybody's talking the same language and they understand what this installation is going to look like, what components are part of it, what should be bid, and what your competitive bidding materials are. In other words, what are the other people bidding? What are they getting? So with that, I'm going to wrap up. If you've got questions or you want to follow up, I've provided my office number as well as email, and of course, MAPEIDigital@MAPEI.com. If you want to follow up on future presentations, we've got one in 2 weeks, as was mentioned, on sustainability and submittal documents. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our producer.
Thank you everyone for your time today. If you have any questions, like Jim said, please send them to MAPEIDigital@MAPEI.com. We will also make today's presentation available upon request. Thank you.